Good afternoon. Thanks for everyone for coming out. This is our monthly meeting to follow up on our last meeting. But today we're going to be really focusing on a couple of examples of how other communities develop their constitution or how they work together. So what we're going to do here is Dacia is going to go through examples of all those examples and how other communities came together and drafted their constitution and how their governments work. So once Dacia does her overview, we're going to break off in groups again, smaller groups, and start talking about what does that look like for Kelly Lake? How does it, those examples, we could maybe take out of those and create something that works for Kelly Lake. And there's quite a few examples that Dacia sort of called up. They have a lot of examples right across, Treaty 8, Cree, all those things. I really want you guys to think about how does this stuff work for Kelly Lake. So we'll go through those. So Dacia is going to give you an overarching of what that looks like. So as soon as we break up in 4 groups, we'll get into a smaller group and have those discussions. Okay? And then right after all of those, and then we're going to be, we'll have dinner. Dinner will be served for us. Okay? Any questions? Dacia? Mm-hmm. All right. So,
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Marcus Hadley. I know most of you. Those of you who don't, I haven't met yet. Hopefully will soon. Just before we get to talking about the subject matter of today, which is looking at examples of other First Nations communities, how they've written down what they intend to do with their government, just going to go back through the last few months and show you what we've done in order to bring us to this place right now, so that there's some context for what we're doing today. So what did we discuss? So we started really in earnest talking about moving towards a Kelly Lake government in February. And at that meeting, we looked at sort of the legal framework or the possible legal frameworks for establishing a legitimate Indigenous government here in Kelly Lake. That included looking at the Indian Act, at treaties, self-government agreements, the fundamental rights that are set out in Section 35 of the Constitution, UNDRIP and UNDRIPA. So that was an initial starting point for this discussion, which give us a context for what's possible in a legal sense. So in March and April, we had again a meeting in each of the community meeting in each of those months, where we looked back at how the people of Kelly Lake organized themselves and made decisions and managed lands and resources in the past traditionally. And that is an important context for the work that we're doing today, which is now going to be looking forward and saying, how do we do this in the future? How do we want to operate our government in the future? So we looked back and 2 meetings, very, very wonderful discussions, fulsome discussions at both of those meetings about history, about traditions, about the way things were done in the past, and what the fundamental aspects of the community look like, what the different roles of people were, and fundamentally how Kelly Lake, the people of Kelly Lake ran their community. So that informed the discussion, helps inform the discussion today about carrying that forward. We also talked about who we are, and as who the people of Kelly Lake are, what the fundamental characteristics are, and a lot of that came down to land, your relationship to the land, your relationship to the resources on the land, and how the land sustained this community and the people through the years. The other piece of which became clear was that there's a particular approach to governance which is not hierarchical, is not top down. It's very collaborative and egalitarian, which is an important thing for us to understand in trying to define what the future of Kelly Lake governance looks like. So the colonial system of a chief and council and of everybody being subject to that hierarchical governance system is not something that is traditional to Kelly Lake. Much more collaborative, much more egalitarian. So decisions were made by the community as a whole, important decisions made by the community as a whole by coming together and discussion. So that's something which we want to reflect going forward in the decisions that we make about what the government looks like in the years to come. In terms of who you are as individuals and as a collective of people, proud, resilient, self-reliant, respectful, and again always working together, finding consensus and making sure that you're working in harmony and respecting the land and the resources on the land. So you can see that these are all key pieces of what we need to bring forward, or what you need to bring forward in putting a government together moving into the future. So again, how we work together. So how as a collective were decisions made, and this again we heard was about coming together and talking through things, about having community meetings, about listening to others, and always being respectful, recognizing expertise in people, and also a great, very important role played by the elders, and done in a way that was open and transparent, so everybody participated and everybody understood and everybody knew what was going on and was part of the decision-making process. In any government, there's the internal pieces which we've been looking at of how you operate yourselves, but there's also an external focus. How do you relate to those around you? And those around you are the other Indigenous communities, as well as the colonial governments that are here, including regional district, the province, and the federal government. And what we heard from the community was that again, based in the land, based in the territory, and respect for your relationship to the land and who you are, and that there is openness and honesty in all the dealings that you have with external governments and people, and also again, asserting this sovereignty, asserting this ownership, this relationship with the land, so that people who come and operate on your land understand that they do that in the context of you participating, you approving, and you being part of the decision-making process and being part of the ongoing involvement with the land. So here we are today. So what does this is the background for what a government could look like for Kelly Lake, and we'll talk more about that today. You'll see as we transition into the examples about how you can take those pieces of those examples or thoughts or aspects of those examples, but this needs to be a document which is created by Kelly Lake for Kelly Lake. And there are some essential statements that need to be in that document, whatever that document looks like. You'll see some examples today of who you are, what you do, and how you go about doing what you do. So all of this, the work that we've done over the last 3 or 4 months, is leading really to inform what we will start today, which is to look at some examples of things that have been written down by other Indigenous communities, and start to develop a familiarity with that, an understanding of the frameworks that those present, and what you can learn from that, what you can take from that, and then what you need to develop as unique to Kelly Lake. We'll start that today, but there'll be more meetings over the coming month or two where there'll be further discussion. We'll look a little more deeply into these examples and into what Kelly Lake makes sense, what for Kelly Lake makes sense. So today is just kind of let's dive in the deep end and learn about these things and look at some examples, but there will be time over the next couple of months for a reflection and more feedback, because all of this has to be driven by you, the community members of Kelly Lake. So there's where we are today. And as Norman said, at this point, Dacia is going to take over and walk you through some of the examples that we've brought to help you out in thinking about what a Kelly Lake government looks like. Thank you.
Okay, so the governance committee members that are here today spent quite a few hours today already going through exactly what we're going to walk through in kind of a similar way together. And so what that entailed was, we know that as Kelly Lake develops its government, there needs to be a basis for that. And as many communities before you, there are several important things that happen along the way. And so this has taken a number of forms, both historically and in more modern times. And so what we'll look through today together, and what the committee members did today as well, so they'll help us have these conversations together, is look at what have other nations and communities done, and why they did that, why they chose to put this information forward when they did, and what they were trying to communicate. So we're going to look at some examples that are historic, early in time, and where we won't pay so much attention to exactly line by line what the language in them are, but we will look at overall, like, what are these things trying to convey, both to the community or the nation and the members on the inside, as well as those external parties. So the external parties can be your neighbors, so the other nations and communities around you, or they can be any level of colonial government. They can be industry, anything outside of the community. So it really builds on these conversations that we've been having, and now we're looking at why other communities and nations have done things to kind of assert who they are and what belongs to that community, and what that accomplished. As we move forward for Kelly Lake, we'll pull that into the Kelly Lake context. But today is a nice opportunity just to start looking at these things in a very general way, and then through the smaller group conversations, just talking about them and learning about them together and asking questions, and then you'll have some time to go off and kind of think about this, and we'll continue to work together on these things when we see you next. So there's a few copies of these things floating around. You'll have an opportunity to look at them in your smaller group discussions as well. And I'm going to do my best to show you these things on the screen as we go. So we looked at this, the governance committee walked through this kind of chronologically, and then thought about the content in terms of the time frame within which these nations were developing these statements. And so we looked at 3 categories of statements. We looked at declarations, which this is an example of, and we'll look at a couple. So a declaration is a statement that accomplishes communicating something really important. You're declaring something to everyone around you and affirming some things about who you are as a nation or community. We looked at a few examples of what are called accords. So an accord is an agreement between either leadership, or in the case of what we'll look at, amongst nations. And so you're coming together and agreeing on the ways in which you'll work together. And as we'll see, and what was important about those is you can have groups of people, or you can have nations, or you can have leadership that may not always agree, but there are shared things that you do agree on, and so you can clearly bring that together and make a clear statement about what it is that you're agreeing to work together on and how you will work through differences aside from those things. And so we'll look at one particular example of that from your neighbor, Treaty 8, because they have an accord of which every BC Treaty 8 member has agreed. And what's really interesting there, and you'll see a little bit of an example here, and then you'll talk about this in your groups, but what that shows is where are these points of commonality? What is it that everyone agrees on that forms the basis of these relationships that ensures that all of these nations work together collaboratively to achieve protection of lands and resources and territory and self-determination and self-government and a clear relationship with colonial entities and things like that. And so as somebody, or as a community, as Kelly Lake is a community connected to Treaty 8, it gives you a nice idea of where you can see, oh yeah, we agree on these things as well, and where those connections will be made as you look ahead to putting together your own document or your own governing statements. And then the last set of examples that the governance committee looked at were constitutions. So those are much longer, more detailed documents, usually that come after something like a declaration, not always, but sometimes come afterwards, and more clearly give voice to some of the specifics on structure of government, what's required of membership within the government, what are the obligations but also rights of any of the members of those communities or nations, and just gives more detail there. So we'll look at some examples of what that looks like as well. So as we walk through this, it's a lot of information. There's no need to worry about understanding everything perfectly. None of us understand it perfectly, but what we're doing is just learning why it is that different nations made these documents when they did and what they contain, and starting to think about, well, what will that mean for Kelly Lake as this community looks forward to its own government. Hopefully that feels okay. So I'll walk through a few examples, and then we'll have an opportunity to look at them in more detail together. So if we start really early in history, so 1910, one of your kind of neighbors to the northwest, or actually from here, I guess it would be just west. So the Tahltan Nation in 1910 wrote their declaration. And so what we noticed as we sat as a committee, the governance committee, and looked at this, we noticed some really important things about what it was trying to communicate. I'm just going to try and make this as big as I can. And again, you don't need to read it in detail, but we noticed that it talked about, one, who this spoke on behalf of. So it gave authority and legitimacy to the document and what it contains by saying we and explaining who that is. So in this case, we, the members of the Tahltan tribe, speaking for ourselves, make known to all whom it may concern. So they're saying this is from us and we are making this statement. And then they connect this to some really clear aspects of what would have been kind of the legal basis for connection. So at that time, that looked very different, right? But what's important here is that it's determining who is making the statement by asserting a collective identity for this nation, and then talking about how it connects with important legal structures. So when we talked about what's important about Section 35, what was important about UNDRIP, and what was important in DRIPA, these were all things that didn't exist at this time. So they were talking about the kinds of legal structures that did exist at the time that they could connect to. So for your community, we'll think about that differently, but it's good to see how others have done this. And then from there, they make very clear statements. We further declare as follows, and here they have 5 different areas that they're making statements, and they're related to territory, they're related to resources in terms of lands, hunting, fishing, etc. They relate to culture and language, and they relate to relationships. So what this is doing is making clear what the relationship is between the Tahltan Nation and its neighbors, the other First Nations around the Tahltan Nation, the Crown government, and then making very clear statements about who this nation is and what it is that they're laying claim to or asserting. So kind of important pieces of that one there. We looked at another very early example, so the declaration of the Lillooet tribe. So more of your neighbors. So this is 1911, so 1 year later. And again, there's some very similar aspects of this. and very clear sort of assertion around some particular things. So here again, we, so the collective, we, the underwritten chiefs of the Lillooet tribe, declare as follows: we speak the truth, and we speak it for our whole tribe. So they're making that very clear sense of authority and speaking on behalf of the whole community. It then moves on to making a very clear statement around claim to land. So at this time, in this place, there was a lot of white settlers coming in. So they were making very clear statements to the provincial and federal government about why it is that should not be allowed and whose territory those settlers were coming to. So very important to the time, right? But again, we see some similar things in terms of that communication to the colonial powers, the collective identity that's being communicated, and that connection to territory. So then when we were talking, the governance committee was deliberating, we looked at something a little bit more modern. So we looked at the declaration of the Nisga'a Nation. So this one happened within 30 years, like the last 30 years. So here we see some different things emerging, which are very interesting. So again, this is who this is referring to, the collective. You see a lot of reference here to Nisga'a language, certainly, but also the cultural heritage. So it's referring to the way that they speak about their land. It's referring to the way that they speak about their laws. It's referring to the way that they speak about their ancestors and their leadership. So all of the words that are in here are in Nisga'a and refer to those key things. So it's establishing very clear connection to those important parts of the Nisga'a identity and culture and history and sense of leadership and governance structure, because it speaks about all of those things right at the beginning. It talks about relationships as well, so living peacefully together with other nations. It talks about the role of traditional leaders and elders, the role of their spirituality, and it ends with, we are Nisga'a, the people of, and I can't pronounce that word, but it's the word of the Nass River, the Lissams. And then it's may the word for their creator in Nisga'a continue to protect our land and nation. So it's a brief statement, one page, but it hits all of those different points. So as we move into sort of more modern declarations, we see different kinds of things coming up, but we see this connection always to who the people are and what it is that they're trying to communicate. We then looked at an example that's a little bit more connected to some aspects of your history. So this is a Cree Nation, Cumberland House Cree Nation. So again, this is more the year, this was 2021, so quite recent. It's establishing the sovereignty of this nation. It's talking about its relationship because it is a treaty nation, so it makes reference to that legal structure and that relationship with the Crown government. Then it starts talking about our lands, our laws, our way of life, and how these are sacred gifts. It talks about the relational aspect with the land and all living things. So you can see, as we talked about the last couple of months, how many community members here spoke a lot about that, the relationship between yourselves and the land, and how that's not one of ownership, it's one of relationality, like the relationship is central to your way of life. There's a lot of that language here as well. A lot of, you can see here as well, and you'll see this in more detail, but a lot of discussion around the duty to protect lands, all of the animals, all of the resources that are there, all the lands, waters. It talks about making sure that there are shared responsibilities, and then it talks about a connection to other laws and protocols that already exist in this community. So again, you can see this is also, all these declarations are about one page, and it's a way of just communicating who the people are making this declaration and what it is that they're declaring something important about, and what that means for the relationships that you have with others. So one that's a little bit different, but it helps us as well. We looked at the Coastal Nations Declaration. So now this is an example of a declaration made by a collective of nations that work together. So why they work together, and you can see, is based on a commitment to protecting and restoring the natural world and retaining culture. So they're working together in terms of protection over everyone's collective territories and everything within those. So interesting to see, it's very short, but it's based on that shared commitment, those shared values, those shared ideas of what it is that everyone wants to work together towards protecting. And then it's based on a set of principles. So having worked with the coastal nations, whenever disagreement comes up on the best way forward, they lean back into the way that they've agreed on these principles for how they will work together. So it's nice to see how these considerations make their way into these different documents and what it is that they help accomplish. So that was the set of declarations that we looked at. So things that you probably noticed in them, they're short, and they say different things, but the categories of information, if you will, or the themes, are all quite similar. So it's a nice way of learning what it is that they accomplish by saying those things. And then the second category of documents that we looked at were the accords. So the one I thought that we could look at quickly at the through the screen together today is the Treaty 8 Accord, because this is now something that's very very pivotal and very connected to your decision making moving forward. So you can see here, this is an accord or an agreement amongst the chiefs within BC's Treaty 8 territory. So what we noticed as we went through these things is it is very declarative. They're declaring many things, but they're doing it as a collective. So we will do this. We will work together to do this. And all of the things that they're making statements about doing together are all of the things that they can share values related to. So for example, we affirm that our lands and resources were not surrendered or ceded to the government of Canada. So making a very clear statement about that relationship to the colonial government. That's shared amongst all of the different nations within Treaty 8. We shall no longer allow the infringement on our Aboriginal and treaty rights. So this is something that everyone can agree on. We will no longer allow resources to be extracted from our lands without meaningful consultation. So just as you've been speaking about how important this idea is for Kelly Lake and for the land around Kelly Lake, that's also a shared piece or commitment. As we kind of go down, there's more around land and permission for anyone to enter that territory and also do anything there. And as we go on, there's also a statement around we shall exercise our inherent right to self-governance by becoming politically involved at the community, regional, provincial, and national levels. We strive to develop working relationships with all levels of government so that our voices can be heard and recognized. So there may be things within those discussions that are different and that there isn't agreement on, but in principle, they agree on this very foundational aspect of the right to self-government. And then kind of close to the end, which is interesting, right? We commit to setting aside our cultural and personal conflicts and differences to stand united for the greater cause of securing a brighter future for all generations to come. So acknowledges that there may not always be agreement, but when you're looking at something that's for the future generation, you have to remember that that's the priority. So you can put aside the differences or you can work through them to ensure that you're doing what you need to do for the future. So another example that's quite different, but shares something useful with us. And then finally, a very different kind of document, but we looked at some constitutions as well. So as you'll see here, a lot longer. So this is the Constitution of the Haida Nation, just as an example. But some interesting things that we can learn just by looking at this. So first of all, it starts in Haida. So there is a proclamation at the beginning about who the Haida are and what this is what this means, what their constitution means, and all of it is in Haida. So that's for them, that's for their nation, not anyone else. There's a brief translation of that, as you can see underneath, which is far shorter. So it's not saying the same thing, because now this is communicating to the outside. And then there's a series of, they just call them articles, but this is kind of now getting into more kind of legal language around how it is that this nation operates. So in this constitution, they make mention of land. So they talk about their territory. They confirm who the people are. So what does membership in as a citizen of the nation look like, and how is that decided? They talk about rights. So what are the collective rights of the nation as a whole, and what are the individual rights of Haida citizens? And then they have a lot of detail about governance in the sections to come. So they talk about what the leadership structure of the governing body is. So in this case, it's a council. They talk about what that council looks like in terms of its construction. They have, because the Haida Nation is many smaller communities, they talk about what each of the village and band councils that's connected to the nation, what that looks like. It's a coastal community, so coastal communities tended to have hereditary leadership, whereas internal communities didn't really, so they do have that history. So they talk about the role of hereditary chiefs in addition to those other, the council that they have. And then they get into a lot of details about the mandate and responsibilities of leadership. So this is how you will work on our behalf, basically. And that goes on for the rest of the document. So another example of something that is communicating some important things, and this is just an example of where it's adding a lot of detail. So why it's useful to think about that, and why it is that we looked at a number of different examples, is that right now, for Kelly Lake, there's a lot of important discussion to be had around what is important to develop now to accomplish what you need to now that helps continue to move you forward. So, a really big constitution or a really significant, detail in some of those things might take a long time to develop, and that's fine. There should be an evolution of these things over time as the community makes progress. As soon as you move forward and you have something new and you have more going on, then you reevaluate, right? And you think about what's needed next. So the important decision for the community now and in the next few months is, what do we need now? So that we can move forward in a good way, so that we can have a governing body, a government for Kelly Lake that helps us accomplish what these other nations and communities are accomplishing through their work in terms of land base, in terms of protection of resources, in terms of sustainable economic development, in terms of services in infrastructure and housing and things like that into the community. So what do we need so that we can move forward? Yeah. Are there any questions about that before we have time to sit and kind of delve into these things a little bit more together in smaller groups? It's a lot of information, so there's going to be a lot of time to process. Okay. Well, governance committee members, there are four of you that are going to take some people each and sit down and just spend some time talking about this.
What they says, so some of our thinking from the governance committee is to give you concepts, think about it, and next meeting have a lot more input into it. So really today is really what you think about it, absorb it. Our next meeting in June, that'll be in June, then we'll have more detailed discussion. So don't worry about not understanding it today. You'll have a whole month to understand this stuff. So that's what we normally do, is introduce it, for you guys think about it, then we come back and start writing things down after you guys think about it for a month or a couple of weeks. It all depends on how we move forward, okay? So we probably need to break up in 4 areas. Tanya is going to be in that corner since he's heading over. So just if someone with that group could be over there. Did you want to stay in that corner? I'll go over there since you're sitting here. I'll take that corner over there. So if you guys decide where you guys want to go, we'll be talking about what Daisy talked about, your initial ideas, but we'll listen to more ideas. Like, this is not the end-all be-all. We'll have more time for you guys to bring up. But this is really important because we're going to decide what our government looks like, our checks and balances, what does that look like, who governs, how we work together as Kelly Lake people. So this is important stuff. This is where the tire hits the road. Lots of the theoretical, now it's really going to come back to how we govern ourselves at the end of the day. All right, so let's break off and have about a hour, 45 minutes discussing, okay?
It looks like the groups are finishing up. Okay. Maybe once folks have a little break, chance to go to the washroom, we just want to do a little quick summary discussion, and then we'll have dinner after that. But having a summary discussion first would be great. So we'll just give everyone a few minutes to get resettled, and then we'll do that.
But we need to let us work with us. But there's a survey that we need to send back. I was hoping you guys take about 5-10 minutes to work out. Because Regional District wants our opinion on and this is the survey that they asked me to take. So I'll give out copies to everyone and just tell them that your user thing. Okay.
One other thing, if anybody would like an emailed copy of what we've been looking at, yeah, I got Grant and Ruby so far, but give me a wave and I'll come over and make sure I put your name on a list, and I'll email you right after the meeting so that you can have those things to look at. Okay.
I think this is the portion where we get some report backs from the leaders there. So Rain, where's Tanya? Des, where they were? They went hiding, didn't they? All right. Yeah, I'll wait till they get back. Alrighty. So Tanya and Rain are back. So this is what I was mentioning to everyone. This is where we're going to be reporting back to the whole group. Since Tanya, you're off to my left, you'll be starting. So, so what did your group have to say in their feedback?
My group didn't really talk a whole lot. They just wanted to process the information and take it back and come back with the ideas. I just had mentioned that they could probably Google some ideas and read some of these statements and come back with stuff that they feel would be relevant to our process.
I guess I'm next. We sort of went through, reiterated what Dacia went through, but some of the ideas that came about was that I think it was everyone agreed that we needed to write things down. Some coming up with a constitution. I think Jarvis talked about how the Indian Act doesn't quite work. So we need, because that's what the current chief and council are, and then we talked about how we did it in the old days and how we didn't really have leaders. Everyone just came in and did what needed to be done. We talked about how I think some of the other members just wanted to take it back and think about it, and they'll have more answers for, but those were the initial thoughts. Did I miss anything that you said, Brian? Yeah, but everyone was in agreement that we do need to write something down. We do need checks and balances, and we do need a constitution to say, you know, it's like if we're going to have an election, it's every 2 or 4 years. What are the powers of those and those type of things, and how we're going to do that. So that's what the group that I was with, but the initial comments were made. So we'll go to Rain.
I think similar to Tanya, my group had the same thing, just processing, because it's a lot to take in. So they just kind of wanted to read on their own and come up with their own ideas for next meeting, because it is a lot of information. But one of the things that they did really like was incorporating both our language into the Constitution or whatever document we happen to come up with. That was important to them.
Some of the things we came up with was having our own constitution for Kelly Lake, one that the nation could follow, and of course Kelly Lake to be a nation, and have a good leadership and council to assist and be honest and fair. Family members from every family to represent their family, manage our lands. And what I guess one of the things was having an educated leadership to recognize our lands are being raped and pillaged by industry. I guess we've seen that already. To ensure that our water sources are protected and to ensure our lands are respected. That's it.
Any final comments from anybody that they want to get off their chest? It's a safe place. It's all right. There's no, you know, any other final ones? I think maybe once you guys bring your ideas back, we'll probably start putting something on paper for all of us to look at our next meeting. So just really think about what does that look for us like? And think about it as, I know not from family, but Kelly Lake as a whole, because that's how we worked in the past, was that what's the benefit of the Kelly Lake as a whole? Not, I think Jarvis brought it, not one family is on the out and one family controlling everything. We should talk about how does everyone benefit the next stage of this. Any final comments? I think when's our next meeting that we're looking at? Yeah. So we'll be back June 8th and 9th to go into what we just talked about today, but it'll be rolling up our sleeves and start putting something on paper, okay? And then we start drafting this thing as we go along. But just think about what works for us.